Welcome to Breaking Through the Contradictions. Here we openly discuss various contradictions and challenges that we pass on and also teach our children that, if not addressed, will impact the individual development of each child. We will explore the topic, share pertinent information, and provide ways for you and I to take action. We look forward to you joining our conversation. So let's get started. The views and opinions expressed by the guests, speakers, and participants in this context are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the organizers, hosts, or any affiliated individuals or organizations. We encourage open dialogue and diverse perspectives, but the individual viewpoints shared during this discussion are personal and should not be attributed to any collective entity involved. Hey, hello.
Hey, how you doing, Tabitha?
Fine. How are you doing, Sharon?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. You get to talk to us today through Breaking Through the Contradictions. Yay.
I am totally excited to be here, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. I know we talked a little bit on Tuesday for Save Our Kids, but I wanted to circle back with you on this platform or on this show because of some of the stories that we talked about when I was first getting to know you a little bit more, and I learned so much about your history and what you had experienced. And I think that it's time to break this contradiction because this one has such a significant impact to so many different children, especially since I've just recently learned or just kind of went and looked for the numbers that there are 7.3 million children that are labeled as disabled and attending school. So it's time for us to have that conversation because, man, we got some work to do, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so today's topic is you have a disability and I don't think you can learn. So unfortunately, like I said, there's 7.3 million children that have been diagnosed and labeled with some form of disability, but they still have to go to school. So that's K through 12. The problem is that inside that disability, as soon as they label you or put you in a box, they have a tendency to stop teaching, or first of all, the one thing that bothered me about your story was a wheelchair equals your brain doesn't work. I don't get that.
That was a direct quote.
Oh my gosh. So it's funny in hindsight because we can laugh about someone else's inability to have empathy or understanding. But at the same time, it's not funny in the sense of this is currently happening to other children. And that is actually causing them a delay and things like that. So you can just share a little bit of your story so people understand you are an expert because
Sure,
you are.
one second.
That's all good.
Sorry about that. So my story goes like this. I was born with cerebral palsy, and every year up until the age of actually from the age of like 4.5 till 10 or till about 9-ish, my parents would go to the school board and say, you're going to educate my daughter within district, right? And every year they would say, nope, we're not. We're going to send her to an alternative school for children with physical disabilities because she's a wheelchair user. And we don't have the resources to be able to educate her and take care of her physical needs within the building. So, of course, my parents, being my parents, who you don't know, but they're very strong advocates, especially my mom. And they would go every year, and every year they would get the same answer until 1977, when IDEA was passed, and the school district could no longer say that they were not going to educate me. The only right that they had at that point was to say that they weren't going to educate me within district until 1979, because they had 2 years to make my home school or the school that they could make physically accessible to my needs. So IDEA gave them 2 years to do that. So when I was in 5th grade, I was mainstreamed full-time into the public school system. I started out in special ed, and then to catch up and everything. And then in eighth grade, I got partially mainstreamed. And by ninth grade, I was fully mainstreamed, but with supports through the special ed department, because I do have a slight learning disability along with my CP. So I needed the support of the resource room and other things that having my IEP, besides my physical needs, could support me on. But I had the academic ability and the educational, ability to be able to be mainstreamed just with the proper supports. So that's how my education, started out. And then all through school, I had some really phenomenal teachers that really went to bat for me, because I had staff and administrators and guidance counselors who were saying, you can't be in that class. And I'd be like, why? And they were like, well, you have a physical disability, so you're not going to be able to manage to do the labs in science. So they put me in the lowest special ed class for science, in, I think it was 10th grade, whatever, I don't know, 9th or 10th grade, because they had to accommodate my physical disability. The reason I say I had some really good teachers, and I really did, was because my science teacher, who was the science teacher of that class, wound up saying to the administration, I found out later when all this transpired, she can't stay in this class. She did all of this stuff in middle school, and she's blowing through the curriculum. You can't keep her here because it's easier physically. And he fought for months. And forget this. And in November of that year, whatever year of my schooling it was, they put me in was called at the time modified bio. And I wound up having a lab partner, which you have anyway. My lab partner was the physical end of it. And these were my partner's words, because I was best friends with my partner. When I went into the class, this teacher made me uncomfortable, because she said, is anybody willing to be Sharon's lab partner? I cringed, because nobody was really volunteering except for my friend, who I'm still friends with today, Tommy, raised his hand and said, I'll be her partner. And then he came over, he switched seats, and he came over and sat with me, because the lab partners had to sit together. And he looked at me and goes, of course I'm going to be your partner. You're the brains and I'm the physical end of it. He goes,
kids will teach you things. Kids teach adults every single day. Yep. You just have to be willing to listen.
And literally, let me interject here. Joke. That was the joke of the whole class.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
Let me inject here. So for those people who do not know, IDEA is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that was signed into law November 29th, 1975. So that meant that it gave individuals with disabilities the ability to go and attend school, to be educated by others. Because what was happening was that they were like, if you are disabled, we don't need you here. You don't need to learn. And they were pushing a lot of people out, like you had experienced. But when they put that in place, that forced them to find a way to accommodate, because a physical disability does not say that your brain doesn't work. So that's like saying if you're paralyzed from the waist down, that your brain automatically stops working. And unfortunately, you have had that experience. And I find that extremely disappointing, disgusting, and not acceptable, because we had this conversation, Sharon. I said, we need to lean into the strengths of others, not the deficit that you see or don't see immediately.
Well, that's one of the things that bothers me so much, because I know this happened to me, and I know it's still happening to kids today, because I work with children with disabilities and I work with parents all the time. And if you are diagnosed with a disability of any kind, whether it's, visible or hidden, if you're diagnosed with something and they put a label on it, the label is actually supposed to be an assistant in that, giving people understanding so that you can get the supports you need to help you be your best self and be able to be educated and perform up to your potential, your full potential, I might add. However, what happens with most people, I'm sorry, but it's just most people, not all, when they see a label, you can't deviate from what that label has decided about you. So you can't grow beyond, you can't have more skills than that label says you can have, and you can't have more trouble in an area that the testing or the label said you didn't have a problem with.
So here's the thing about you, it's very funny. Because here's the thing, they said pretty much said you can't learn. You have a wheelchair, that's completely, you can't learn, right? And here you are with a master's degree in education. So how much of it you couldn't learn? And whatever learning challenges you had nothing to do with your ability to learn. I think it almost had an ability of how you're going to be able to process. So it's a processing thing. But I kind of look at things like Jack in a Box, right? You have everybody always shoves remember that toy you used to shove Jack all the way in the box, right? And close the lid. And no matter what happens, as soon as you turn that little knob, Jack would jump up. But he was always strongly just restricted to the box. I think in a lot of cases when people label us, they automatically assume and project their idea as to what you are capable of, what you are or are not capable of. And that is a problem because you don't have a right to put on me what you think I'm able to do. I have every right to tell you what I am capable of doing. And then between the two of us, we can fill the gap.
And right. We can figure it out. Well, I think I shared this story with you the other day, or when we first met. I had a Spanish teacher also in high school who on parent teacher night told my parents that he didn't think they would be surprised about the grade I got, but he was surprised that he had to give me this grade because when he met me and when he saw me, he automatically assumed my brain didn't work. So after he finished that sentence, because he said, when I saw her in a wheelchair, I just assumed her brain didn't work. So when he finished that sentence, my father, who basically always used to let my mother do the advocating, couldn't contain himself because he came home and told me this story. And he said to the teacher, "Excuse me, but you didn't give my daughter anything. You had to write down what she earned. And no, I'm not surprised that you either wrote down an A or an A+."
There we go. So that means they're at home. They were your teacher number one. They were doing their job. Your parents were Johnny on the spot. They were like, "Nope, we're going to do this." So you work with parents and teachers, currently right now. Do you notice that some of that bias actually still exists in the schools today?
I know for a fact that some of that bias still exists. I will be fair and say that I think we've come a long way from when I was, when my parents were advocating for me, or even when I learned to self-advocate. I do think that we've come a long way, but I know that we still have a long way to go. And I'm not going to be quiet about that. I'm not going to say I feel bad for saying it, because we are still a system that is so focused on deficits, or what, when the testing, it shows deficits and it shows assets and skills. But for whatever reason, when administrators get their hands on those tests or those labels and everything like that, they focus solely on the deficits. And we're still working from a place of we need to shorten the deficit. We need to fix the deficit. We need to get it as close to fixed as we can before they graduate.
But
as opposed to, okay, let's try and work with the deficit to see if we can close the gap a little bit so that certain things can be easier, smoother, improved. But let's also work on strengthening the assets, because that's what this person is going to be able to go after school and build on. none of us, whether we have a documented disability or not, we all have deficits and we all have deficits or weaknesses. And we're not going to go for a job that says, oh, I really stink at this. Can I please do this for 8 hours a day? None of us are going to. Who's going to do that?
No, we do. We promote to the highest level of our own incompetence, right? So
Right.
if you ever run into people who have this job and you're just like, how did you get this job? Right? That's because that deficit is significant that other people can see it. But someone else, they were like, we're just going to throw you in the deep end and you'll either sink or you'll swim. But one way or another, we'll figure out, we'll have the data to support our next steps, right?
Yep.
But children are not like that. Like I said before, just because a child is resilient does not give us the right to test their buoyancy. It's not fair and it's not acceptable.
And
right?
Can I just also say that it's not fair, it's not acceptable, and you're completely damaging that child's self-esteem. And if you damage a child's, when a child's self-esteem is damaged, that takes a lot of time to undo. And oftentimes it goes into adulthood, and it goes into the teen years, and it there's just a whole lot that stays with you, whether we want to admit it or not, it stays with. So my thing is, if we all have, areas that could benefit from improvement, otherwise known as weaknesses or deficits, why do we have to, for anybody, but especially for kids with disabilities, why do we have to focus on that? Do you not think, did any of the providers working with me, whether it was my physical therapist, my this or that, my teachers, not think that I was aware of what my limitations were? Did they not think that I would watch other kids be able to run and do things and learn how to do math quicker than me or whatever, and not be eaten up inside about it? But what I wanted to be seen for, what I needed to be seen for, was some of the gifts and the talents that I have. Mm-hmm. And I needed the school system to start working with me on those gifts and talents way earlier than they did, so that I could cultivate my self-esteem, my sense of purpose, and so that I could go into college, because yes, I went to college. I could go into college with a sense of purpose and self-esteem, and knowing that I could do this, knowing that I could succeed. I knew from a very early age that I was born to do two things: help others and be a mom.
Really?
So I knew that. I didn't know what that looked like, by the way. I didn't know how either one of those things were going to happen or what they look like. But I did know that I needed to go to college, because in order to be able to help others the way I wanted to be able to help others at the time, you needed a college degree to do that. Yeah. So I knew that college was my wheelhouse to getting to where I wanted to go. But they became so focused on the academics. But there's other things, there's other skills that I needed help with: the social emotional, the socialization. I was isolated by my peers. I was bullied incessantly in high school. I loved going to school because I loved to learn, and I wasn't going to let the bullies set me apart from my goal, my ultimate goal. But I absolutely dreaded every day of school. I would not change being in public school, by the way. So if people are listening and saying, well, if you were being bullied, why didn't you go back to your segregated school or your school for children with disabilities? Because I wasn't being educated properly.
And for that point, I can say this. Yeah. And because I had a very similar experience with my child. Mm-hmm. And that is not real life. That is why it's not okay for you to isolate a group of people that you feel as though fit your specific
Couldn't box. Agree with you more.
You cannot put children K through 12 in an environment in which they will never get to truly learn how to be, exist, and contribute, and then put them into the world at 18 and 22 and say, hey, go get it.
Yep.
and think everything's going to be okay, because that's not how things work. And it's
Nope.
unfair to do that to a child. But you keep talking about this one thing I have to say. Your parents, parent one, teacher one, Johnny on it, right? But then when they added co-parent, their co-parent,
The
their
school.
parent number two, I'm going to tell you, this is what I hear in your parents. They were like, nope, that's not where I want. That's not the co-parent I want. Nope, I want her in here. I want this co-parent. So
Yeah.
your parents, even although as back then, it can still work today, that say that if you do not like the value systems and what's happening in the current school that you are in, I have to honestly say, you move around. You get to choose.
Well, let me just say that I am not only a person with a disability that watched my parents advocate for me and taught me how to advocate for myself. Those advocating skills have come in very handy because I have a son who was diagnosed at the age of 6 with ADHD. And the H is very prominent, let me tell you, or it was when he was younger. Then he was diagnosed at the age of 9 with, at first, generalized anxiety. Then at the age of 14, that was shifted to social anxiety and added major depressive disorder. And when I say to you that the school district does not understand, and I know my school district certainly, and I know other parents in my district who feel this way, did not understand my son, did not understand his diagnosis, refused to work with his outside treatment team. Anytime they made a suggestion, the answer I got was, well, they're the outside people. They're not the inside people. They're not with him in school, so we can't listen to anything they say. Okay. So, but why I'm telling you this is, to your point, by 10th grade, the school district had enough, and they offered me, before I had to open my mouth, they offered me the opportunity to place him in an alternative school for children who have anxiety and depression and ADHD. And I said, go for it. They thought I was going to argue with them. But I was tired of arguing. And I said, no, I want him to be in a place where his mental health is understood. Because you're saying that all these things don't matter and that he just needs to get over it and this and that and the other thing. And it's a documented issue. And there are things that you can put in place that you're refusing to put in place. And so we need to move him over. So it was life-changing. Will I say that it corrected everything and that he's perfectly fine now and on a path? No. But he went from being somebody that was completely school avoidant to attending school every day, to being on the honor roll, to finding his voice again, because he had lost his voice many years earlier because of how he was being treated. And so he advocated with legislature. He was on the student body. I can't say enough about how he was able to grow. He wound up going to college. He did wind up taking a gap year after his first semester to kind of figure things out. And he's now going to be re-enrolled because he thinks he's figured it out, and we're going from there.
You tell him we haven't even figured it out. Don't worry, it's a lifelong,
I tell him that,
journey.
Here's my other thing too. You're very right. To that point, why, whether a child has a disability or not, see, we have to remember something. Kids with disabilities are people.
Yes.
So they're kids first, they're people first, but then they have the extra added layer of having to deal with whatever the impacts are that their disability creates. Okay.
Yes. And so this is what I will say for this. One of the things I need to address, because we always bring out the things, the challenges, and the different stories that let us know that what we need to work on is true and exists. So that's what we're doing. But we also want to make sure that we do educate everyone who's listening with information that's going to be helpful for them. So what I will say is the IEP, the individual education plan for your student, that is mandatory for your schools to abide by. And this is what it says. The Individuals with Disabilities Act requires schools to offer the services and accommodations outlined in the IEP. If this isn't done, the students, parents or legal guardians may file a lawsuit claiming that the student's rights were violated. So, because IDEA was put into place in 1975, that says that every child, even the ones with disabilities, have the right to be educated. Yep. The other side of that is that now, not only that, if you choose not to abide by a plan that a group of leaders have come together and said, this is the best plan moving forward for that child to be properly educated, if they choose not to follow that plan, I have seen teachers being fired, principals being fired. I have seen where people have lost their ability to be a teacher. And that is because this is very, very key. You're taking away a child's right. So not only are you not following the IEP, then you turn around, and I'm sorry, children are humans. You are absolutely correct. We as adults need to get our egos, check them bad boys at the door.
Thank you.
Have no place when it comes to these children. You sitting there whispering, I can't stand that kid. Or, oh my gosh, we're going to die if I have to take care of them. Guess what? Those children are not animals that cannot talk back. And they hear that stuff. And you, parent number 2, are chipping away at their self-esteem and their ability to use their voice. And you're taking away pieces of them that we want them to have, that they came here to share with us.
Can I add something?
Sure.
If the school is parent number 2, right? And these people who are parent number 2 are chipping away at the child's self-esteem. Can I just ask you, Tabitha, and ask people who are watching, how do you expect for that child to then want to work with you?
Exactly.
To do what they need to do to be able to live up to their potential, because they don't trust you. They know you don't respect them, so they don't respect you, and it's not going to work.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I feel like that's why I made it a co-parenting conversation, because ultimately what's happening is that we are joining forces with another group of people to help us manage and develop this person into the human being that's going to contribute and participate in everything that we do here. But if you're destroying them on the way, I have to say, I'm about to pull rank and say no. But the other thing I would say is that for my situation, I have 2 children, and one, I know when I say this, people are like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I have one kid that's average, and I got one that got superpowers. That's how they both grew up. I was like, and I would say, all right, so this one got some superpowers. And people ask me the question, and this is what I said. At the end of the day, he is just different. He is no better, no worse than I am or she is. He is just different. He processes things differently. He moves in life differently. And guess what happens? He does have a superpower, because he's actually helping me and other people around him learn patience, learn how to handle his circumstances, learn how to work with him in a way that's a win-win on both sides. He does have superpowers, because at the end of the day, when I walk into any environment and I'm trying to work out things, I'll tell you, one day he burned himself. I have to say, I thought I was the worst parent on the planet. The worst parent on the planet, because the whole entire iron was outlined on his arm.
Oh, wow.
And I did not know. And they were putting little Band-Aids on him. Little kids are funny. They put little Band-Aids on it. And I took him to his event so he can go. And as I'm sitting there in the audience and I'm watching him, now mind you, he has a label, but my label is better. He has superpowers. That foolishness they put on him, whatever. So he goes, and I see him come out, and he has this shirt wrapped around his arm, and I'm like, what is he doing? Oh my gosh, I'm just going crazy. I was like, well, whatever. It is what it is. At this point, we're just going to go with it.
Yeah.
So he gets in the car, and all of a sudden I hear my little one, my oldest, say, hey, I think we got a problem. And I go, and he takes this, and they take the wrapping off. I turn around and see this massive burn on his arm.
Oh, man.
I just burst into tears. I can't catch my breath. Everything, I feel like, oh my gosh. And here's the thing, that event was 2 hours long.
Uh-huh.
So, and we had to be there early. So, that's at least,
3 hours.
right?
Yeah.
And so he was dealing with that whole entire time. And I was like, and I'm saying, why does he have that shirt on him? Why is there Band-Aids, right? Little did I know it's all of this. I had to take him to the ER. And when I tell you, he has superpowers. I could not get his name out, his birth date. I couldn't get anything out. I'm standing at the thing I'm trying to write, and through tears and the nurse is like, oh my gosh, and it's like, this is horrible. He had 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his arm, and it continued to burn, and I didn't know. And then that mess, and every time I rewrapped it, I'm gonna remember the one day he turns to me and he says, I don't think you should do this anymore. And I said, why? And he said, because every time you come near me, you just start to cry. And I was like, it's crazy. But the point is that my thing was that he is able to do what we need. He's able to help us where we're not able to help ourselves sometimes, or we're not able to understand. So it's unfair to believe that because he was able to give his name, his birthday, and all the information that I could not see past my tears.
We should not put preconceived limitations on anyone. The labels are there to give guidelines, in my opinion.
That is it.
But the guidelines the finish line can be adjusted.
Yes, there you go. Well,
here's the thing. I work with school systems, teachers, administrators, and I am seen very often as an adversary instead of somebody that's on their team. And I'm working hard to not be seen as an adversary, but I honestly don't care because I want to make a difference for the kids. But I'm here partially today to say one of the barriers that we need to break down, it's got a two-pronged thing. And one is we need to start focusing on assets a little bit more, a lot more actually, along with the deficit. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying ignore the deficit and don't try to improve, bridge the gap, close the gap a little bit. But I am saying at the same time, you could be building on an asset. That's two. That's number one. Number two is we really need to stop the mindset of I'm your enemy. I'm here to blame you. No. If we all have the same goal, which is to educate children to their fullest potential and for each child to come out of school with a self-confidence, competence, and a purpose, then why are we fighting each other so much?
This is true. So I'm glad we're starting this process now where we're beginning to give the solutions. So here's what I will say. One, if you're a parent with any child that has a label, period, I don't care where it comes from, whether it's your doctor or your school. When you go into your IEPs, don't go alone.
Amen.
Don't go alone. At this point, don't go alone. It's not okay because you need help and support, and being all by yourself is not the answer. The other thing is make sure that you have a plan for your child. Don't think that they have the best plan for you. Build a plan for you so that you can so that they can follow that plan in the IEP.
Can I also add to that? When you go into your IEP meetings, there's two things you need to know. You do not have to sign it because when you sign it, it means you agree with it. So Correct. Don't sign anything. If it has a name spelled wrong and you want that name change spelled correctly, don't sign the IEP. Right. The other thing is at the bottom of every IEP, at least here in New York, and I believe it's everywhere, there's a sentence that says parent concerns. If you brought up any concerns or anything that you want done differently, doesn't have to be a negative thing, they are legally obligated to write it on that IEP. And if they do not write your concerns on the IEP, please do not sign it, because they will say that you never said anything and that's why they didn't follow through. I'm sorry, that is not me being, negative. It's me being factual, because I've sat through many IEP meetings as a parent, and I've sat through many IEP meetings as a student with a disability, and I've sat through many, many IEP meetings as an advocate, and I have seen it all. So
that's nuts, right? But that's, again, what I'm saying is that, so you're absolutely correct. Don't sign the IEP if you do not agree with the plan. The worst thing in the world to do is to sign something that you don't agree with. You wouldn't sign a contract for a car if you didn't agree with the payments. Don't sign the IEP if you don't agree with it. Also, if your team is not providing you the necessary information in order for you to make a sound decision, and they're not listening to you. So at the end of the day, this is a really good example of that co-parenting relationship. So now I'm just talking about parent one and parent two. So parent one, so at home, parent two is not listening. Here's the thing. They spend a lot of time with your student, okay? But you spend the off time with your student, with your child. And the difference is that when the world stops, you and the child are there together, not the school and the child. So you have that child for life. That school may only have them upwards of 5 years. So elementary is 5, middle can be 3 to 4, and high can be 3 to 4, right? So the bottom line is that you, as a parent, have most of the control in this situation. And until you exercise that control, your child, with the superpowers that were gifted to them, can be challenged in a way that you will lose on both
sides. If your IEP team is not listening to you, including the head of the special education services, I don't know if you guys know this, but you have the right to go to pupil personnel, and then you also have the right above that to go to the superintendent of schools. So
they call it a pupil of personnel.
Yeah,
up there. I don't know what to call it down here. Then
it's got different it got different titles in different states. But my point is, don't be afraid. They'll intimidate you not to do this. Yes. I'm telling you, don't be intimidated and just go up the chain. And the other thing that you can do for the how is, please, if you're going to have verbal conversations with people, or it happened at a meeting, do yourselves a favor. Anytime you have a conversation over the phone or in a meeting, follow it up with a recap email.
Yes.
Or if you're not having a conversation over the phone or in person, please put it in an email. And the reason is because then you're protecting yourself. You're actually protecting the school too, even though they don't think so. And most importantly, you're protecting the rights of your child. And, I've seen plenty of parents get annihilated in meetings. When I was a parent, was getting annihilated in a meeting. And a lot of the reason I was getting annihilated was because I know this stuff, because I went to school for it and I grew up with it. So,
but there's one thing about yours which I found very interesting. So, and I'm going to address that because that happens for whatever reason. So when we go to school, it's pass or fail, pass or fail, pass or fail. That's kind of how life goes. Pass or fail. Meanwhile, life outside of that is not, because apparently we live in a whole entire world of gray. But it's in school, it's pass or fail. But what happens is that now we leave school, we go out into the world and come back, and now we got children and we're helping to get through that. And what I started noticing was there was a shift. It's like being back in the school puts you back in a pass or fail mindset.
Yep.
And so then you think, for whatever reason, as much as you may have gone out and had this worldly experience of your own, that teacher, that principal, and that group know more about your child than you do. That is probably one of the biggest mistakes that we make as parents.
Yep.
Your child, you if you're the mom, you have been carrying that baby since day one, and they hear your heartbeat over anybody else's for the rest of their lives, right? So you have to know that you know more about your child than they know about your child. And so it's the job.
Absolutely.
Very, very, I agree with this. that child has a PhD in their body because that's the only place they've lived.
Yep.
But as a parent, you have an MD in all things that are them. You have to go ahead with the partner of choice and connect the dots. And if they're not willing to listen, they're not your partner.
No, I was going to say, find a new partner.
Find a new partner. Move around, friends. Move around. We have.
And believe me, I know the moving around is stressful. I know the moving around, you have to get the school district to work with you to move around sometimes, most of the time. And I know that's stressful, but it's not any more stressful than sitting in a meeting, having yourself be annihilated, having your child be annihilated, and all that stuff. So what I like to say is, I know this is a cliche, but it works. Turn your lemons into lemonade and take your negative experience and just keep pushing, because I'm telling you, as a professional, as a mom, as a person who grew up in the school system, in both school systems, actually, the effort is worth it. Believe me when I tell you, there were lots of nights that I cried myself to sleep, not knowing what the next morning was going to bring, either with my son or with the school district and with the school administration and teachers. So I'm not here to say that never happened to me. It happened a lot. It can be a very lonely and isolating world for the parents and the children, both. And so if your team's not listening, get a new team. It's your right. It's your right.
It is. And believe it or not, the school has to pay. And I think a lot of people don't realize it. If your school does, and I've said it and I will continue to say the same thing, if your school does not have the resources that are available to teach your child the way that the IEP or the plan is in place for them, they are required by law to pay for your child to go to another school to have those resources applied to them.
What IDEA says, for those of you, to add to what you said before, what the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act says is that every child is allowed and has the right to a free and appropriate education. And if that education can happen in the least restrictive environment. So what that wording means is, if they can be educated in the school district, that would be considered the least restrictive environment, and they should be in the school district. However, if the school district does not have the resources to give your child what they need, then they need to go to the next best, least restrictive environment, which would be what we call here in New York an alternative school, an alternative placement. And that is where my son went for almost all of high school. And like I said, it was life-changing. He got his voice back, because when he was younger, he was very social, very active, and it started to change in middle school drastically. When he went to that alternative school, he started to advocate for himself. It took time, don't get me wrong, but he advocated for himself. He found his voice, and he went from a child that was avoiding school to a child that was attending school and making honor roll and getting accepted to colleges and vocational programs. So it can happen, but we as parent number one, or guardian number one, or whatever your role is, as the primary caretaker, you can have your bad nights because you're allowed. It's going to be, you expect it. But when you come out of those bad nights, come up swinging and say, okay, what can I do something about? And where do I need to start? And just put your head down and start. And please ask for help. Come to myself. Come to Tanya. I can help you. I can help you. We have other resources that we can connect you with, because you don't have to do this alone, and you shouldn't do it alone. There is a statement that there's power in numbers, and in these cases, there is definitely power in numbers.
Right. There's no need in doing, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I've had to do it myself on my own. It is not fun and it's not pleasant. And so for that reason, I make it a point that I do other people reach out to me. I just got someone reaching out to me just recently, and their situation is going to result in a lawsuit, because the type of harm that the teachers are doing to this specific student is illegal in so many different ways. And as we wrap up, I'm going to give you one story to say so that we understand, so we can drive this point home. I have a friend who her child was nonverbal, and as he was going through school, they were to a certain degree he couldn't be all the way mainstream, but he was in a public school and things like that. So he had some things that he was doing, and he's actually working now, right? But I remember when she called me and she said, "Hey, I have this problem," and the problem was that she went to touch her son, and he flinched, and she gently rubbed over his leg and found that there was a knot on his leg. And what had been happening was that the teacher was abusing the student because he was nonverbal. And here's the thing, the school knew it. So again, I have to say, parents, if you're not paying attention, your child, the reason why I bring that one up specifically is because if you're not paying attention, your child is at risk of being abused by the second caregiver. And that second caregiver can be school officials, one. The other part of that is they played a waiting game for her. So they never would call her back, but they knew the teacher who had done that harm to that student, who eventually did leave the district. But the point is that they took away her ability to actually do process, so to speak, for that situation. So you have to pay attention. That's why it's really important that parents understand. At home, you have the child during the times where everything is, the night, and when things fall apart and the holidays, you have all of these times with them. So you know more of their mannerisms and their behaviors. Schools are trying to get these students to walk in a straight line and follow the instructions and do things repetitively, but they're not looking at the behaviors and the mannerisms of the student. So therefore, they're not going to nurture that. That's the job of people at home to do. So when your child starts to exhibit behaviors that are not like themselves, you might want to ask the question is what's happening over on parent number 2, because whatever is happening is taking away their ability, and they're taking away their rights, and they're doing more harm because now that kid didn't want to go to school for a while, and then things just transpired. And if you don't fix it now, and if you don't help your child now advocate for themselves and get the best possible education they can get, they will become a ward of the state, because no one else will want to pick up the weight of caring for a child who does not have enough education that's going to be able to help support themselves. And that's the one thing I wanted to make sure to drive home. So today, our contradiction is you have a disability and I don't think you can learn. That is definitely, it's like Mythbusters. That is not true. Just because people have disabilities does not mean that they're incapable of learning. What that means is that we have to be more inclined to learn how to communicate successfully with those people who have that type of label, and learn how to engage with them in a way that is going to be productive and helpful.
They learn differently. It's not that they don't learn, they learn differently. And as I said earlier, we all learn differently. I don't care whether we have a documented disability or not, because there's not a person on this planet. I know this made you smile before, Tabitha, but there's not a person on this planet that doesn't have some disability. If you look at the definition of disability, we all have disabilities and deficits. Just some are more documented than others.
And so it's all good. So again, I thank you very much for hanging out with us for a little while today. I think that we were able to prove that this is not true. You have a master's degree. What does a wheelchair have to do with the fact that you?
I have a master's degree, and I'm a certified life coach like 2 or 3 times over. So
that clearly does not work. So stop. So teachers, adults, forget the labels of what you are. You're an adult and a human. You're over the age of 25 and you're caring for anyone else. Stop projecting what you think onto another human being who is a young person who is impressionable, because 9 times out of 10, they'll shock you. It's not what they're thinking. That's not what you think they're going to be able to do. They already know what they're here to do. And I'm here to smack a beehive every time I see one. So nothing gets solved as long as we don't talk about it. So today we talked about the biases that come with that. So I thank you all very much for spending your time with us. Thank you, Sharon, for spending the time and sharing
Thank you for having us
and your story. So until next time, same bat channel. Words are power. Please remember to use them wisely.
Thank you for your time today. We appreciate the support and look forward to you visiting us again next week. Same time, same place. Until then, words are power. Please remember to use them wisely. If you have an interest in discussing a contradiction or would like to be on our live show, please let us know and send us a direct message.